You can't afford anything in here. Try the gas station down the street, barked Jeremy Alston, the store manager of the boutique furniture showroom, just before yanking open a glass door and motioning sharply for the black man to leave. People like you don't shop here, he added, voice laced with contempt loud enough for the other shoppers to hear. What he didn't realize was that those 11 words would set in motion the end of his career, the unraveling of a carefully constructed lie, and the rise of a man whose silence had hidden unimaginable power. This wasn't just another incident of racial profiling. This was the day a man who thought he ran the room learned what it meant to truly own nothing at all. Because the man he humiliated wasn't just any customer. He was someone who had quietly shaped industries and influenced people Alston would never even meet. And all it took was one card. One business card slipped silently onto the counter. It all began on a rainy Wednesday afternoon in downtown Atlanta, with the polished windows of Langston and Company. Furniture gleamed with the illusion of luxury. Inside, Jeremy Alston walked the floor like he owned it, short sleeves tied around his gym-hardened arms, Bluetooth headset in one ear, and the smug confidence of a man who'd never been challenged by anyone who looked like they worked security at night. He liked to say he had instincts that he could tell just by looking who was serious and who was wasting time. And when a man in the gray hoodie and jeans walked in, Jeremy decided he'd seen enough. "Sir, can I help you find a way out?" Jeremy said with a fake smile, stepping in front of velvet section the man had paused to examine. "No, I'm just browsing," the man replied calmly, his voice deep but controlled. He didn't raise it. He didn't cuss. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at the furniture and kept walking. But that calm only made Jeremy more aggressive. "Sir, not allowed to loiter in here. This is a private showroom. You need to leave now." The man finally turned to face him, his eyes unreadable. "You don't even know who I am," he said softly. "I don't need to," Jeremy snapped, already dialing mall security on his phone. "I know exactly what you are." But that was the moment everything changed. The man slowly reached into his jacket pocket, not aggressively, but with the practiced calm of someone used to people assuming the worst. He pulled out a crisp, clean business card and placed it on the glass counter beside a display of handcrafted mahogany chairs. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out. Jeremy barely glanced at the card, still buzzing with adrenaline from the confrontation. It wasn't until mall security arrived and he handed them the footage that he took a proper look at what the card actually said. And that's when his hands began to shake, because printed in black and gold lettering were the words: Darius J. Moore, Executive Director, Federal Diversity Oversight Council, Office of the Inspector General. That moment hit Jeremy like a freight train. The mall cameras had recorded everything. So had his own. He had just racially profiled and verbally assaulted a federal official. But it wasn't just his actions. Worse was the fact that Darius Moore had said nothing. No threats. No lawsuits. No raised voice. That meant this wasn't over. It meant it was just beginning. The next morning, Jeremy's district manager called. "We need to talk. Right now." By noon, he was sitting in a stiff-backed chair at corporate HQ, sweat pooling under his collar as a stern-faced HR rep slid a tablet across the table. This footage was posted to Twitter last night. It's already been viewed 1.6 million times. Jeremy's stomach dropped. The video showed everything. His smug face, his angry tone, the moment he accused Darius of looking suspicious. Someone had added captions and background music. The comments were brutal. "This is what racism looks like with a name tag. Imagine thinking you can gatekeep mahogany chairs from a federal official. Hope Jeremy likes folding tables. That's all he can afford now." Jeremy's voice cracked as he tried to explain. "I didn't know who he was." The HR rep didn't blink. That's the problem. But that was just the tip of the iceberg, because Darius Moore wasn't just an official. He was also a silent force in Washington's diversity audits, a man with clearance to launch internal investigations, freeze budgets, and even call hearings. And now, quietly, he was doing just that. While Jeremy fought for his job, Darius was already making phone calls. Not angry ones, strategic ones. Within 48 hours, the Office of Civil Rights had requested the store's hiring records. A week later, Langston and Co.'s parent company was hit with an internal bias audit stretching back 5 years. Jeremy had no idea his little outburst had triggered a full-scale federal review, but the impact didn't stop with policy memos. That simple video had ignited something deeper. Black entrepreneurs began speaking out. Former employees of Langston and Company posted anonymously about being passed over, harassed, or silenced. Hashtags trended. A lawsuit followed. And all the while, Darius remained silent, watching, documenting, waiting. 2 weeks after the incident, Darius Moore finally gave a public statement. It was brief, just under 2 minutes, filmed in his quiet home office. I didn't speak out because I was afraid. I waited because I needed to see what the system would do when no one was yelling. I wanted to see if it would still protect a man who thought I didn't belong. I've been silent long enough. The video got 12 million views in 3 days. And then the hammer fell. The federal audit found systemic issues. Langston and Company was fined $3.2 million. 3 executives stepped down. Jeremy Alston? Terminated. But not before the findings revealed something even darker. Evidence that Jeremy had previously blocked promotions of qualified black employees, altered sales data to favor white clients, and used code words in emails. The card Darius had left wasn't just identification. It was a warning, and it had been ignored. In an exclusive interview later that year, a former co-worker described Jeremy like this. He didn't just think he was above the rules. He thought he was a rule. But the day he kicked Darius Moore out of that showroom, he crossed an invisible line. He didn't just profile a black man. He profiled the wrong black man. Today, Langston and Company has new leadership, new policies, and a quarterly report they must submit directly to the office of the Inspector General. And Jeremy? Last seen working gig jobs under a different name, his reputation unrecoverable. One action, one moment of prejudice, one card left behind. And the empire built on discrimination came crashing down. But the real story isn't just about a manager losing his job. It's about what happens when power is mistaken for privilege. It's about a man who didn't raise his voice, didn't get violent, didn't beg for decency. He just handed over a business card and walked away, because sometimes silence is louder than rage. And sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who says the least. The fallout was just beginning. By the time Langston and Company paid their fine, they had become the centerpiece of every DI training seminar in the country. Their logo became a meme, their mission statement rewritten, their values questioned. But the man behind it all, Darius Moore, still hadn't raised his voice. And now, quietly, he was preparing for something even bigger. You see, what Jeremy didn't know, and what most people never bothered to ask, was that this wasn't the first time Darius had been profiled. It wasn't even the 10th. He had kept a folder, a digital log, with names, locations, comments, patterns. Over the last 9 years, Darius had experienced everything from taxi drivers refusing to stop to boardroom executives mistaking him for security. But he never reacted in rage. He documented, compiled, cross-referenced, because he knew a day would come when those receipts would matter. After the Langston incident, civil rights attorneys began contacting him. We've seen what you've done, but what if we went wider? What if we broadened the data? Darius agreed. He launched what would later be called Project Pattern, an independent, privately funded investigation into discrimination in retail spaces across the United States. Undercover audits, secret shoppers, data tracking across race, gender, and class. Langston was just the start. Meanwhile, Jeremy Alston had disappeared from the public eye. No LinkedIn, no Facebook, no comment. But silence wasn't protection. An anonymous email began circulating in local HR circles, a full dossier of his behavior. It detailed interviews with former co-workers, screenshots of internal chats, even records of racially skewed sales referrals. Someone had compiled a profile on the profiler, and everyone knew who it came from, even if Darius never admitted it. Langston's former head of HR was subpoenaed. Depositions were taken. A whistleblower revealed that Jeremy had been warned before multiple times. He had 3 verbal write-ups. Management just didn't want the PR headache of firing a top seller. Now they had a bigger headache, a federal civil rights case and an investor boycott, all because they protected the wrong person. But not everyone turned against Jeremy. A small, vocal group of supporters clung to the idea that he was just doing his job, that maybe the man had looked suspicious. Maybe Darius had come in to cause trouble. That narrative didn't last long, because Project Pattern released their first report, and it hit harder than anyone expected. The findings were damning. 63% of black male shoppers in high-end retail were approached by staff within 60 seconds of entry, compared to 14% of white shoppers. 41% of black shoppers reported being followed. 22% of stores had no black employees in sales roles despite diverse customer bases. Langston and company scored a failing grade on every metric. Jeremy Alston had become the face of a much bigger disease. In one clip from a documentary that followed, a former store clerk said, "We were told to look for time wasters." That was code. Everyone knew what it meant. It meant black men. And the moment Darius walked in wearing a hoodie instead of suit, Jeremy saw what he wanted to see. But the thing is, real power doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears silence and watches. Darius kept watching, as other stores were quietly investigated, as policy after policy was rewritten, as CEOs issued statements, not out of guilt, but fear. But he also saw something else. He saw young black professionals walking into stores with a little more confidence. He saw signs posted on doors that read, "Zero tolerance for profiling." He saw conversations happening in places they never had before, all because one man had handed over a business card and walked away. Months passed. Then, almost a year to the day of the incident, Darius received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside it read, "You ruined my life. I made one mistake. I lost everything. Are you happy now?" There was no signature, but he didn't need one. Darius sat with the letter for a while. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired, because he hadn't ruined Jeremy's life. Jeremy had done that himself. What Darius had done was simply show the world what already lived behind the showroom glass. And what happens when a mask slips? That night, he gave a speech at Howard University, his first public keynote since the incident. He stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of young faces, some inspired, some angry, some afraid. He began, "I didn't fight back that day because I knew where I came from, and I knew where he stood. People like Jeremy, they run on borrowed confidence. They walk in buildings they didn't build, carrying titles they didn't earn, hiding behind policies they don't understand. But we carry history, and sometimes that's heavier than rage." The crowd rose to its feet. Outside, it began to rain, just like it had the day Jeremy kicked Darius out. But this time, no one was hiding, because the storm had already passed. The Langston incident became a case study. Harvard Law analyzed it. Netflix greenlit a docuseries. Schools use it in ethics modules. But more importantly, thousands of stores across the country re-examined their policies. Some hired new DI officers. Others instituted secret shopper programs to check for bias. A wave had started, and it was still rolling. Meanwhile, Jeremy's name became unsearchable in corporate databases. HR circles whispered a story like a cautionary tale. Don't be a Jeremy. Check your bias before someone checks your name. He applied for jobs under pseudonyms. Got rejected when background checks caught up. One blog post titled, "How Racism Killed My Career," was traced back to him but removed within days. His silence now wasn't power. It was survival. And Darius? He didn't stop. Project Pattern expanded to food service, then banking, then tech. He testified before Congress. He was nominated to a federal advisory board. And every time he told his story, he ended with the same line. It started with a card, not because I needed to prove who I was, but because they needed to remember who they weren't. There's power in that. Not the shouting, not the lawsuits, not the millions of views, but the calm, the choice to let your truth speak louder than your anger. The restraint to know that your presence alone challenges a system built to ignore you. In the final scene of the Netflix docuseries, Darius walks into another furniture showroom. This time, he's dressed in the same gray hoodie. He browses. A young sales associate approaches him. Black, maybe 22. Need help with anything, sir? Darius smiles. Just browsing. The camera pans down to a display of business cards on the counter. He doesn't need to leave one this time. The message has already been delivered. So remember this. When someone tells you that you don't belong, when they try to reduce you to what they think you are, when they mistake your silence for weakness, let them, because the storm doesn't announce itself. It just arrives.